To get a better sense of what tomorrow's elections hold for the country home to the African Union, let's now invite the Horn of Africa political commentator, Dr Awol Allo, in the British capital, London. Dr Allo, a very good evening to you. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to the Globe.
Thank you for having me.
Now, the fact that millions will have to wait until September to vote due to logistical, legal and as well as security-related challenges, will this not throw the integrity of the elections into disarray and raise questions whether it was free and fair?
Well, absolutely. But I think it's not just the fact that about a fifth of the seats constituting the 547 parliamentary seats are not taking part in the election. I think there are much broader and deeper political issues and crisis that is facing the country. So if we just step back a little bit and kind of provide some context, the expectation for this election, the hope for this election, that it would be a landmark in the sense that it would put the country on a path to transition, that this marks the beginning of Ethiopia's democratic journey. And this is not just a hope, it was an expectation that was created by the government, by the incumbent Prime Minister, who in some astonishing ways, said to the Ethiopian public that the previous government, in which he was a part, used terrorist methods to stay in power. And he said he will offer Ethiopia a new hope, and he will take this country to a different direction. And there were some practical steps, positive, constructive steps that he has taken on the ground in the early days of his tenure. But now what we see is that instead of delivering that democratic change or a promise for change, the Prime Minister is delivering a ruinous election that risks destabilizing the country even further. And in most cases, maybe the country will not really return to any sense of stability in order for it to be a country that would have any hope going forward.
Well, is this not, the fact that the election was postponed twice already, could this not have been a ploy by the incumbent leadership and the government to sort of extend its term in office?
Absolutely. So when it was first extended, I think most of the opposition groups somewhat agreed that that initial extension was necessary. It was initially scheduled for May 2020, then extended to August 2020, then extended actually twice. But the first extension, I think, is the one extension that kind of changed the relationship between the opposition group and the government. When the government extended the vote that is scheduled for August 2020, the excuse that was provided was the COVID public health emergency. A lot of the opposition forces rejected that postponement. The Tigray regional government in particular went ahead with the election and organized that election. People voted overwhelmingly for the ruling TPLF party, and that set federal government and the Tigray regional government on a collusion course, which ultimately led to this devastating war that has dominated international agenda over the last several months. And of course, in other parts of the country as well, the Prime Minister immediately took significant measures on the ground in terms of systematically eliminating some of the formidable opposition forces from the political scene. So in other regions outside Tigray, the Prime Minister has already removed competent individuals and political groups that represented significant electoral threats to his chances. So it was Tigray that was putting up a significant challenge to him, and Tigray has to be tackled militarily. That military operation didn't go very well, although the Prime Minister initially promised it to be a quick surgical operation with achievable objectives. The country is still fighting that war, and precisely because of those decisions that have been made to postpone the election, the country now faces significant security and political challenges, and the likelihood of this election providing stability or bringing about legitimacy is almost zero, because it is totally rejected by the majority of the people in the country.
This is a first big test of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's leadership in the coming election tomorrow. So what are the chances of success for Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed? And what's the level of influence? And does he still enjoy as much support as he had grown accustomed to for the past few years?
Now, in terms of this election itself, the outcome of the election is already predetermined. I think what these elections do is simply crown Abiy Ahmed as the new king in the country. King is really what he has been aspiring to be. He talks about how his mother, when he was 7 years old, told him that he would one day grow up to be a king. I think he repeated this claim on several occasions. From his point of view, this is merely a coronation, not really an election that offers a real alternative to the people. So his power right now is basically anchored in nothing else other than force, violence, and power. To what extent the Prime Minister could somewhat try to regain legitimacy after the election, we don't know. I think a lot depends on what the government would do. But I think what is clear is that this particular election, instead of offering Ethiopians a chance for a new beginning, it is basically repeating the same anti-democratic, unfair, non-credible election that Ethiopians went through in 2015 and the years before that. So it's basically a ritual that is simply designed to legitimize those currently in power. But it's not the simple fact that it is legitimizing those in power, but it also represents a significant threat to Ethiopia's ability to stick together, to stay together as one country going forward.
It may legitimize those in power, but then there is growing international concerns about whether the elections will be free and fair. For instance, the European Union said it will not send in observers to observe the elections, and Ethiopia hitting back, saying that external observers do not certify the credibility of an election. What do you make of that spat?
Well, of course, authoritarian regimes across the world, particularly in Africa, would invoke this debate around neocolonialism and foreign intervention, sovereignty, and so on and so forth. But of course, it's not just international condemnation. The government is widely rejected by Ethiopians across the board, except particular constituencies that are supporting the government for particular ideological reasons. So if you take, for example, the Oromia regional state, where about a third of the MPs come from, what this Prime Minister also somewhat came from, in terms of at least the previous political dispensations that existed, because the EPRDF party from which he came had four ethnic based parties. One of those is the Oromo People's Democratic Organization, and Abiy Ahmed was part of that organization. But Abiy Ahmed, since coming to power, completely rejected the kind of main organizing principle within the broader Oromo public, which is the nationalities question. And he is seen widely as somebody who betrayed the Oromo cause after coming to power on the back of the Oromo struggle. In that region, the Prime Minister is widely rejected, and that's why having realized that his new party have no chance of winning election in that region, he has to eliminate some of his significant electoral opponents, such as Jawar Mohammed, Bekele Gerba, other members of the Oromo Liberation Front from the electoral scene. So in as much as the government and the Prime Minister were rejected by the international community, they were rejected by Ethiopians internally. But the possibility of people on the ground expressing that by way of a protest is almost zero now, because the repression is so deep.
What do you make then of insinuations that voter numbers have, or rather voter registration numbers have been inflated?
Now, the Electoral Board at the beginning had the goal of registering some 50 million people. Initially, about a month and a half back, the number of people who were registered were very, very small. Then there was this meeting where the chair of the Electoral Board met with the Prime Minister and regional presidents, in which the possibility of government supporting the electoral process, the registration process, was discussed. Following that meeting, within a short period of time, the number of registered voters increased exponentially. And so a lot of people raised questions around whether these registrations are actually legitimate. In some regions, the Electoral Board itself say that regional authorities have actually inflated the registration process. It has found some issues, and the Electoral Board stopped some of those elections going forward. So one of these over 100 constituencies that are not participating in the elections are areas where the Electoral Board itself found a problem. So generally speaking, the electoral landscape is simply not free, not competitive. It's not just by way of repressing the opposition, closing down their offices, but also actually interfering with the registration process, most likely also with the voting process, because the determination on the part of the government is such that they have to make sure that they win the election.
All right, Dr. Allo, great chatting to you. Thank you so much for your analysis.